Welcome back to Who's to Know. So today I wanted to talk about cookbooks and how to read a recipe. As you have seen, we are often trying to teach more techniques than anything, but we do really value recipes and the ability to know how to break a recipe down. So I wanted to talk about good recipes to keep in your wheelhouse, or good cookbooks to keep in your wheelhouse if you wanted to start collecting some different cookbooks. But I'll also just be able to give you at the end of all of this. This is the one I would say you really need if you just wanted to pick one cookbook to own or even just to check out from the library. But also we want to talk about how to break a recipe down and how to read a recipe, whether it's from a magazine, whether it's one handed down to you from a grandmother, or just one given by a friend, or one out of a cookbook like I'm going to show you today. There really is an art to reading a recipe. And so it's not just as simple as looking at it and then starting the process. You need to know how to process it, how to think through how much time things are going to take so that you don't get frustrated, so that you get a good result in the end, hopefully. And also, the more that you read recipes, the more you're going to be able to pinpoint, oh, this is a really good recipe. I should follow this one. Or they might not know what they're talking about. Because there are definitely those recipes, especially online. You're going to find more of those. So to start with, of course, Mastering the Art of French Cooking by Julia Child, and Simone Beck and Louise Berthold. That is obviously one of our favorites. It is a more specialty cookbook, but one thing that Julia does so well in this cookbook is that they have their master recipes. And then from their master recipes, they have additional recipes that you can sort of tweak it. So she's got a recipe for how to cook a steak braised in a pan. And then from there, she's got different variations, how to cook it with mushrooms and white wine, how to cook it with spinach. So the nice thing is that you're learning the technique itself, and then she's teaching through recipes how to then do variations on the same original recipes. You need to be able to have a sort of a solid base, and then from there you have so many variations. And so that's what makes the Mastering the Art of French Cooking such a good cookbook. It's not going to be your just go-to because you want to bake something, because she really is not super into baking in this cookbook. I think there's a little bit of it in the back, but for the most part, this is for cooking, not for baking. So this is not going to be your cookbook that you go to because you want to make chocolate chip cookies. But if you really want to know how to make a sauce, if you would like to know how to roast a chicken, or cook a steak, or make scalloped potatoes, this is a really, really good cookbook for that. And she does break things down so well. One of the things that she does very well is that she has along the recipe what you're going to need as the recipe goes. And so a lot of recipes, it just has everything all at the top, which there's nothing wrong with that, but you do have to refer back to the top a lot. The one thing that would make this difficult is that you do have to make sure that you have everything you need. You would need to read through the ingredient list multiple times to make sure you have everything you need. And then she has steps broken down very well. And she will often say, this is the point at which if you wanted to make this ahead of time, you would stop here. This is how you would chill it. And then this is how you would reheat it. And this is how you finish it. So if you're just going to make it all at once, then just go straight to the finishing process. If you're going to chill it and then come back later, then this is where you would stop. This is what you do. So she gives very good instructions for that. And so that is part of why we really love Mastering the Art of French Cooking, is not because we're French cooking aficionados, but because of the way she breaks down a recipe. It is really, really helpful. So I have to recommend this one first because of Who's to Know. But the next one I will recommend is a cookbook called The More with Less Cookbook. This is obviously very well loved. I got this as a gift from my parents when I got married because I grew up with this cookbook in our house. My mom cooked from it a lot. So this is more of like a frugal cooking cookbook. It is a Mennonite cookbook, and they do a lot with soy, and basically the subtitle is Suggestions by Mennonites on How to Eat Better and Consume Less of the World's Limited Food Resources. So there's a lot of recipes from around the world. This was more of like a Mennonite missionary cookbook, actually, and so there's a lot of ethnic recipes from different cultures. So it's really fun to be able to just try different things, and it's not super expensive. So I really like this cookbook because we try to eat more protein in our house. And so they have more plant-based forms of protein, or if they're going to use protein, it's going to usually be chicken or ground beef. You're not finding a lot of steak or roast or large cuts of pork. You're really dealing more with the cheaper cuts of meat anyway. They do have some baking in here. One of my favorites is their honey whole wheat bread. It's a really solid bread recipe. And they've got a lot of things like that. Skillet beef with lentils. It is such a simple recipe. And the way that they break their recipes down as well is so helpful for someone who is learning to follow recipes. So I do highly recommend this. You can find this on Aid Books. Any used book website is really where you would find this. I don't even know if they're printing it anymore, honestly. You could look on Amazon to see. But I love the way that they break the recipe down. It's similar but just more concise than Mastering the Art of French Cooking. So they tell you basically in bold are the ingredients themselves, and they list them as you're going in the recipe. So you can check to see if you have everything you need based on looking at the bold font. But then it's giving you the instructions all along the way of what to do with it. So this is a really good kind of beginner cookbook, in my opinion. And again, it's really simple ingredients. It's lentils, butter, onions, garlic, ground beef, bouillon cubes, or you could use just canned broth, a couple tablespoons of rice, sugar, salt, cumin, pepper, vinegar. Really, if you're building your pantry, that's pantry staples in my house. I really have that almost all the time. The ground beef might be something I need to go to the store for, but for the most part, this is really basic. It does not include a lot of really fancy things. A lot of them are shelf-stable vegetables, like carrots last a long time in the refrigerator. Celery does as well. Onions and potatoes last a long time on a shelf. So they do a good job of using things that are just they're not exotic. They're dried spices that you can keep in your spice cabinet. And if you continue to cook from the same cookbook, you tend to use the same types of spices as well. So highly recommend this. This is just such a great cookbook, and gives you a lot of fun ideas. So the More with Less cookbook. Another one of my favorites is Bread and Wine. So this is actually a cookbook book hybrid, but at the end of each chapter there is a recipe that has to do with a chapter that she wrote. So it's a fun book to read, but I actually keep this on my cookbook shelf because I cook from it more than go back and read it. I have like the Gaia Cookies. That is a recipe that I go back to a lot. They're basically granola cookies. This is more what you would consider a modern day traditional recipe layout, I suppose, where you have all of your ingredients at the top, and then you have the step-by-step what to do with each thing. These are very simple recipes. She's got a recipe for bread. She's got recipe for a blueberry crisp, which is really good and really simple. She's got a little appetizer of bacon wrapped goat cheese filled dates. So it's a wide variety of things that she has in this cookbook, but it's really, really fun. And everything she has in here is really delicious, and it does make it more meaningful to follow the recipes if you do read the book. But again, I recommend this even just for the recipes, if that's all you would want to get. And in the back, they do have a recipe index. So they've got enchiladas, mango chicken curry, farmer's market potato salad, a lot of salads. There's a white bean soup, There's a dark chocolate sea salted toffee, flourless chocolate brownies, breakfast cookies, mac and cheese, mini mac and cheese. So it's more of a comfort food, just sort of general cookbook, but I do highly recommend this. It's just really fun. The recipes are tried and true. So this is a fun one to keep either on your coffee table or on your cookbook shelf. Next up, this is the Mac Daddy of American cookbooks, The Joy of Cooking. This is a newer edition where they have gone back and they had removed some recipes over the years as they had changed the cookbook, but this is one where they've gone back and they've kind of found the favorites and they've reincorporated them or tweaked them enough to make them accessible to people. So this is basically the cookbook that if you had to pick one cookbook out of everything that I'm telling you, this is the one that I would choose. I would say that because almost anything, definitely not absolutely anything, but for the most part, you can find what you need in here. So you want to make chocolate chip cookies, it's in here. You want to roast a chicken, it's in here. You want to make risotto, it's in here. There's just such a good amount of information, and they teach techniques in here as well. So they give some good illustrations about how to make stuffed cabbage rolls, and they actually give you an illustration on how to do that. They also, it's set up similarly to the More with Less cookbook, where you're getting the ingredients in bold, and then you're getting the instructions along the way. So again, it's very good as a beginner cookbook. It is a huge cookbook and it tends to be more expensive, but it's worth it because really, if you only had to buy one cookbook, this would be it. And you can find older copies or used copies on places like eBay or Amazon, or possibly even at a used bookstore. So this is one of those where I just love to go through and dog ear pages or highlight a recipe or make notes even as I have tweaked something, or like the quiche recipe in here, I actually have tweaked it because I didn't like it the way that it was written. So I've been able to write in the margins because there's some good white space. So I've been able to write in the margins ways I've wanted to change a recipe or ways that I have changed a recipe, or write in there, you know, this is a favorite, and be able to dog ear the page and go back to it. So this is just such a good cookbook because they do have some ethnic recipes in here as well, but then there's just a lot of good old American recipes. And so there's a lot of other information in here. If you want to learn how to do canning, there's stuff on that in the back. Salting, smoking, drying, preserving. There's a lot of information in here. So really this is like the one you absolutely need if you were going to go ahead and buy a cookbook. So highly recommend The Joy of Cooking. I actually did not have this until a couple of years ago when Brittany bought it for me as a gift. And so I have used it so much since she gave it to me. I can't even believe I lived that long without it. The last one is if you are really into Italian food. So this is called The Essentials of Classic Italian Cooking. Marcella Hazan. And she is basically, I call her the Italian Julia Child because she is very similar in her, the way she does recipes. She is very thorough in giving descriptions of recipes. She also has main recipes, and so they're not in the same order as they are in Mastering the Art of French Cooking, where it's all in the same category, but she will give you, you know, you're supposed to use this sauce, and then you're using this sauce, and then you're using this pasta dough, and then you're going to be combining all these recipes to make this one recipe. So it's definitely more intense, but I bought this cookbook because she teaches you how to make homemade pasta, and that was something that I really wanted to learn. And so I figured she knows what she's talking about, obviously. And so I really wanted to have this as something I had on my shelf. I don't use it all the time, but I did want to be able to have something really good to go to if I wanted to make a more traditional pasta sauce, or, you know, just again, learning how to make pasta from scratch at home. It was just something I was challenging myself to learn to do. So This is a little more obscure, but if you do love Italian food, it would be one that would be fun to get and to look through and just to learn from, because she gives so much information in it. It's more than just a book of recipes, it's a book of information. And that's really what all of these cookbooks are that we recommend, is that they're not just recipes, because again, you can go on Google and Pinterest and you can find as many recipes, more recipes than you even want. And that's great. And I use Pinterest and Google all the time because I love to be able to just look and see, oh, that picture looks exactly like what I'm looking for. So let me see if the recipe adds up to it. However, it's so good to have physical copies of cookbooks because they have teaching, they are consistent. And if you start to really enjoy using one cookbook, it's going to be more consistent in the way that you are learning to cook. So that is super helpful. So how to read a recipe is almost an art form in itself. And the reason that is the case is that you can read a recipe and it could just be one paragraph long and think, oh, well, that's easy, I'll just do that. But what that person has not done for you is they've not broken down the steps so that you really comprehend how long this process is going to take. For them, the recipe might say that it takes 35 minutes, but if it takes you 35 minutes just to chop the vegetables, it's obviously going to take you longer than 35 minutes. So being able to look at a recipe and say, okay, what is it that they're telling me to do? First, you look at your ingredient list to make sure that you have everything you need to make that. Once you've determined, okay, I have everything I need for this recipe, I've got the meat, I've got the veggies, I've got the spices, I've got the cooking oil, I've got the heavy whipping cream that it calls for, then you can move on to, okay, how much time is this going to take? What utensils do I need for this? What are the steps? Should I have things prepared beforehand? So looking at how long, for example, I'm going to use beef stew as an example. You're going to need your stew meat. You're going to need your vegetables and your potatoes. You're going to need some stock or broth or water or wine, whatever you're going to use as your liquid. You're going to need some spices, probably some bay leaves, some salt and pepper, some garlic powder. So you have all of these pieces that you need, and you want to look through, okay, well, what do I need to do first? Well, meat is the first thing that you're going to be handling. So getting your meat ready, getting your pot ready that you're going to be cooking it in. And for me, I often know that it's going to take me a little bit to cook the meat. So if I don't have the veggies ready beforehand, I can start working on peeling and chopping those vegetables while I'm cooking the meat over on the side. That might be stressful the first time that you're making beef stew. So you might want to prepare everything so that you can pay close attention to cooking the meat so you don't burn it. And you can really see the process. So you look at your recipe ingredients, then you read the recipe. And I usually read a recipe more than one time before I make it the first time, because I want to make sure I'm understanding what it is that we're doing here. Am I going to be having to cook something for a good 30 minutes before I move on to the next step? Well, I might not have time for that tonight, actually, now that I come to think of it, because I'm going to be either using the oven or I'm going to be using the stove for something else, and I don't have the ability to do that. And so being able to kind of break it down, and even if it's a more complex recipe or if you're just learning to cook from a recipe, taking a piece of paper and for yourself almost rewriting the recipe in smaller steps if you need to break it down into smaller chunks. So, you know, cut meat, you know, heat up skillet, brown meat in oil, remove meat, brown veggies in oil, you know, saute veggies in oil. Breaking down the recipe in a way that you understand it so that you are sure that you are going to be able to follow this recipe. And so it's almost like learning in a class where you're taking notes. You might just need to take notes on the recipe first so that you can feel more confident moving forward following the recipe. And then that way, if you have a question about what does this even mean? What does it mean to saute something? Then you can look that up beforehand before you're right in the middle of the recipe and you get frustrated. So I recommend breaking it down. If it's a little more complex, writing some notes either on the side of the recipe if it's actually printed out, or just on a piece of scratch paper, so that you can understand what it is that you're doing. And even writing out, okay, I'm supposed to do this for 20 minutes. I'm supposed to bring this to a boil and let it boil for 5 minutes. And that way you can remind yourself to set a timer, or at this point, I'm going to insert in here that I can chop these veggies while I'm waiting on this to cook, or I can put this in a pot while I'm baking the pie crust, or whatever the case may be. Starting to do what works for you, but understanding that you have to be able to read a recipe, make sure you understand it so that you can confidently move forward, and not letting things that you don't understand intimidate you, but be able to look up things you don't understand, ask somebody a question that you don't understand, go look up a video on YouTube to see, what does this look like? What does this even mean? And then be able to move forward with following the recipe. So I highly recommend that. It really makes it more fun. And then once you have gotten used to following recipes, then you can start to tweak them. So I would not recommend tweaking recipes when you are just starting out. If you have not been used to following recipes or cooking, then follow the recipe to a T. And if it doesn't turn out the way you want, make a note about what you didn't like about it. And then you can go back and try to figure out what you would like to tweak on it. But almost always, and I've been cooking long enough that I can't now say always, because there are times when I can look at a recipe and say, I'm not entirely sure that I agree with that process. Especially if it's one that I find on Pinterest or Google. I don't exactly know how vetted this recipe is. So sometimes, because of knowledge that I have of making something similar in the past, I can kind of tell, I'm not sure that this is actually going to turn out the way I want it to. So being able to know for sure what I'm getting myself into is a little bit easier now. I still make mistakes. I still screw up recipes, but being able to follow that recipe the first time is really important, so that you can then make notes on what you didn't like about it. And I do encourage you to make notes, whether it's in the notes in your iPhone app, writing a note about what you didn't like about it, printing the recipe off of the computer. I mean, maybe I'm a dinosaur thinking that you can do that, but printing the recipe off if it's one off of the internet and making notes about it, about what you wanted to change about it. Like, it was too spicy, the sauce was too watery, I didn't like that. And so next time you can try to change that, or look for a recipe that looks like it would make a thicker sauce and then use that one next time. So anyway, that is my recommendation on how to read a recipe, because there are so many good recipes out there. Sometimes they're just not fleshed out the best way. And so you want to be able to do that so you can follow it, so you can enjoy it. So I do recommend getting some cookbooks. You can even just get them from the library. That is what I've done sometimes when I've wanted to see different styles of cooking, but I didn't want to commit to buying a cookbook. So you can even get The Joy of Cooking from the library, so that you can see if you even enjoy cooking from it. So look at your library, look at your used bookstores, look on Amazon, look on eBay, look on Abe Books. Those are all great resources to get cookbooks, and you don't even have to pay full price for them, or you can get them for free. Look at yard sales, estate sales, places like that where you can get them for cheap. And just making sure that it's a cookbook that has things in it that you would actually want to cook. Because I collected cookbooks for a long time that I never cooked from one time. I just liked the concept of it. So I've started only keeping cookbooks that actually have things that I know I'm going to cook for my family or for myself. So I hope that helps. If you would like any other recommendations, if you have questions about these, questions about how to read a recipe, please leave a comment, and we will be happy to answer those questions. And we will be continuing to work on teaching skills, what different definitions are from recipes. We'll be working in a future video on chopping and slicing and peeling, and what does it mean to saute something? What does it mean to sear something? Things like that. So hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon.